Hi, Flat Stanley fans. Today I'm going to read for you Stanley in Space. Okay, so we're going to look at chapters 7 and 8. Now, in chapters 1 to 6, the lamb chops went to space. The president asked them to go. The president needed people who were good at adventures, so he picked the lamb chops. So they were getting closer to the planet Tyra, okay? And then the Tyrans are like, oh no, we're not friendly anymore. So the lamb chops were really scared. But then they looked at the window and the Tyrans were about this big. So the lamb chops were less scared. But we do know that the Tyrans have a problem, okay? And in these chapters, we get to hear the problems, okay? Chapter 7. So what's their problem? Why do they need help from people from Earth, okay? So here's President Ott's story, chapter 7. They're sitting in the Star Scout, listening to the story. Tea does help. I am quite myself again. Mrs. Ott nodded to her husband. Go on, dear, tell. Rain drummed faintly on the Star Scout, making even cozier the scene within. Around the dining table, the lamb chops occupied their usual places. The Tyrans sat atop the table on thumbtacks, pushed down to serve as stools, sipping from tiny cups Mrs. Lambchop had fashioned from aluminum foil and nibbling crumbs of her homemade ginger snaps. Okay, so they have tea, they've got food, ginger snaps is like cookies, and they're going to tell the story now, okay? Now, sighing, President Ott set down his cup. You will have observed, lamb chops, he said, how greatly we have enjoyed these tasty refreshments. The fact is, Tyra has for some time been totally without fresh food or water fit to drink. We live now only by what tins and bottles we had in store. Mrs. Ott made a face. Pink meat spreads and spinach and that dreadful fizzola. A bit sweet, yes, said General App. Gives one gas, too. But... Never mind, cried Mrs. Ott. President Ott continued. They're a little bit angry, okay? They're not happy with this. The cause of our tragedy, lamb chops, was Supergrow, an invention of Dr. Epps. Supergrow, Epp promised, would double our crops, make them double size, double delicious as well. A great concept, he said. So they had this invention, Supergrow, and it was going to make the farmers grow huge vegetables and really fast and all that kind of stuff. It sounded great. We scientists, said Dr. Epp, dream larger than other men. For 3 days at the Science Center, President Ott went on here means like continued his story. Epp brewed his Supergrow. Great smelly vats of it, enough for the whole planet. But then, oh, no Tyran will ever forget that 4th day. I myself was strolling through Uck's Park. How beautiful it was! The trees and grass, so green. The sky, green, said Arthur, but everything's brown here, not green. A mishap, murmured Dr. Epp, with the Supergrow. Mishap, barked General App. The stuff exploded, Epp, all over the place. Well, nobody's perfect. Dr. Epp hung his head. He's embarrassed. All those huge vats, lamb chops, President Ott continued. Boom! One after another. Boom, boom! Shattered windows blew the roof off the Science Center. No one hurt, thank goodness, but great clouds of smoke darkening the sky. And then, such dreadful luck, it began to rain. A tremendous rain, mixing with the smoke, falling all over Tyra, into the rivers, onto every field and garden. Every bit of greenery. Rising from his thumbtack, he paced back and forth, walked back across the table. When the rain stopped, there was no green. None. Just brown. Worse, Epp's test proved that our water was undrinkable and that nowhere on Tyra would anything grow. I broadcast at once to the nation. Do not despair, I said. Tyra will soon recover. Oh, good, Mr. Lambchop said. President Ott shook his head. I lied. I couldn't tell the truth for fear of causing panic, you see. The test showed that it would be a year at least before Tyra was green again, and long before that we will have emptied our last tin, our last bottle of Fazzola. So they're going to have no food or water. He sat down again, covering his face with his hands. So then we sent a message into space. Lure some other planet's spaceship, we thought. Hold it for ransom, you see. Make them send food and water. Oh, shameful, underhanded. You will never forgive us, I know. So all of these words here, like lure, means kind of like trick people into a trap. Okay? Ransom means like they're going to hold the spaceship, and then the other planets will send more food and water and stuff. Underhanded means tricky. Okay, so the president knows that they did some bad things here. Okay, you'll never forgive us. His voice trailed away, and there was only the patter of the rain. Close to tears, the Landchops looked at each other, then at the little people on the tabletop. The Tyrans seemed particularly tiny now, and brave, and nice. You poor dears, Mrs. Lambchop said. There's no need to conquer us. We would help you, willingly, if we could. The Tyrans seemed at first unable to believe their ears. Then, suddenly, their faces shone with joy. Bless you, cried General App. Saved! Mrs. Ott clapped her hands. We are saved. Saved? Said Mrs. Lambchop. Of course, said President Ott. Don't you see? Earth's spaceships can bring food and water till... Oh, what's wrong? It was Arthur who explained. I'm very sorry, he said, but there's just the Star Scout. Earth hasn't got any other spaceships, and it would take years to build them. The Tyrants gasped. Years, said Dr. Epp. Stanley felt so sad he could hardly speak. And it's no use going for food in the Star Scout, he said. By the time we return from Earth, you'd all be, well, you know, dead, said Mrs. Ott. In the Star Scout, a terrible silence fell. The facts were clear. The cupboards of Tyra would soon be empty. This is cupboards, no peace now. And then all its tiny people would starve to death. Ooh. Wow, Flat Stanley is kind of a sad book. Chapter 8. Okay, Chapter 8. Stanley's good idea. The teapot was cold now, and a last cookie crumb lay unwanted on the plate. Gloom hung like a dark cloud within the Star Scout. It's not fair, Arthur said for the third time. It's just not. Stop saying that, Stanley told him. That's 4 times now. "5," said Dr. Epp. General App tried to be cheerful. Well, still some tinned meat, eh? And plenty of great Fazzola. Much to be thankful for. I will never be thankful for great Fazzola, said Mrs. Ott. It's just that, Arthur sighed. I mean, Earth has so much food. Millions of people, and it's mostly still enough. The Tyrant seemed amazed. Millions? You're joking, said President Ott. Ha, said General App. Dreadful crush. I should think millions. Mrs. Lambchop smiled. With all our great nations, many millions, and still the numbers grow. Well, here too, President Ott shook his head. Youthful marriages, babies, one after another, but millions. Our population is just Tyraville, of course, is 683. 84, said Mrs. Ott. Mrs. Ix had a baby last night. Now it was the Lambchops who were amazed. Just Tyraville? Arthur cried. But Tyraville's your capital, you said. Well, it would have to be, wouldn't it, dear, said Mrs. Ott. Stanley shook his head. On the whole planet, only 684 Tyrants? Gosh, I'll bet. Wait! An idea had come to him. Stanley had exciting ideas before, but none that excited him as this one did. Mrs. Ott, he shouted, how much do you weigh? Stanley, said Mrs. Lambchop. Mrs. Ott was not offended. Actually, Mrs. Lambchop's like, Stanley! Don't say that. Don't ask people how much they weigh. Mrs. Ott was not offended. Actually, I've slimmed a bit, although not, sadly, in the hips. I'm 6 ounces, young man. Why do you ask? The words rushed out of Stanley. Because if you're average, only children would be even lighter, and all the tyrants put together would weigh, let me figure this out. He's doing some math. Less than 300 pounds, said Mrs. Lambchop, who was good at math. Though I don't see Mr. Lambchop. Then he did see. Oh, good for you, Stanley. That lad's bright, we know, said General App. But what? General, said Mr. Lambchop, summon all tyrants here to the Star Scout. Fetch what remains of your tin food and great Fazola. Perhaps Earth can be your home till Tyra is green again. Okay, I don't know how all 600 are going to fit on the Star Scout, but we'll see. We'll see if it works, okay? Chapter 9 and 10 next. Goodbye.